Evelyn Drake was a woman whose presence could silence a room. At 61, she had led Drake Enterprises for decades, turning it from a modest family firm into a billion-dollar empire. People spoke her name with admiration in business circles, sometimes with envy, sometimes with awe. Yet, for all the power she commanded, Evelyn often found herself returning home to an empty house, where the quiet pressed in like a weight. Success could buy almost anything, she thought, but not the warmth of companionship. It was during this season of quiet that she first noticed Noah Bennett. He was only 26, a new hire in one of her company's growing divisions. By resume alone, he was unremarkable, one among thousands whose careers began in her empire. Yet there was something about him that stood out, something in the way he carried himself. He asked questions others were too cautious to raise. He worked late without complaint. And most of all, he met Evelyn's gaze with confidence rather than fear. Their first exchanges were small, a polite good evening when he passed her in the hall, a brief word after a presentation. But repetition matters. Each smile, each glance, each moment of acknowledgement wove itself into something larger. Staff noticed before Evelyn admitted it to herself. The whispers began quietly, carried in corridors and murmured at lunch tables. A raised eyebrow here, a knowing glance there. Evelyn had lived long enough to recognize the sound of gossip, but she ignored it at first. She told herself it was nothing. He was simply another employee. Yet in the privacy of her thoughts, she knew it was more. She felt something stir inside her. Not as a CEO, not as a billionaire, but as a woman. Clara Monroe, her closest friend, noticed too. Over tea one evening, Clara studied her carefully. "People are talking," she said gently. "And you know how cruel talk can become when power and age are involved." Evelyn didn't argue. She only nodded, though her silence was not agreement but hesitation. Clara's warning was clear, but so was the feeling Evelyn could not deny. After years of carrying the world on her shoulders, someone had finally looked past the crown she wore and seen the woman beneath. And that, she realized, was how it always began. With whispers in the hall. As weeks passed, the whispers did not fade. They grew louder, though rarely spoken to her face. Evelyn felt the eyes of her staff linger too long, heard the shift in tone when conversations paused at her arrival. Yet what unsettled her most was not the talk of others, but the change within herself. Noah Bennett unsettled her. Not because of his youth, though that difference was undeniable, but because of the way he seemed to pierce through the defenses she had so carefully built. He was bold, speaking with a frankness others avoided. Where colleagues tread lightly, Noah stepped forward with questions that made her pause. And beneath his ambition, there was something else. An unguarded sincerity that disarmed her. One evening, after a particularly long board meeting, the office had emptied. Evelyn lingered at the window, looking down at the city lights. She thought herself alone until she heard his voice. "Doesn't it feel heavy, carrying it all?" She turned, surprised. His question was simple, yet it struck at the truth she rarely admitted, the loneliness of power. People came to her for answers, for guidance, for decisions, but never for understanding. Yet here was a young man asking the question no one else dared. For a moment Evelyn did not respond. She only met his eyes, feeling seen in a way she hadn't in decades. It was a dangerous moment, and she knew it. But the heart rarely listens to reason once it has begun to stir. Clara noticed the shift immediately. Over dinner, she leaned forward, her expression concerned. "You're lighter somehow, Evelyn, but be careful. What feels like lightness can also be fire, and fire consumes." Evelyn smiled faintly but said nothing. She wanted to believe she was still in control, that she could draw the line when needed. Yet each encounter with Noah made the line blur. For Noah, the whispers seemed meaningless. If he heard them, he gave no sign. He carried himself with ease, speaking to Evelyn with the same confidence he always had, as though the world around them didn't exist. That fearlessness, once disarming, was now magnetic. And so Evelyn stood at the edge of something she knew could undo her. Logic told her to step back, but her heart, long silent, urged her forward. And hearts, once awakened, rarely surrendered to reason. The annual gala had always been one of Evelyn Drake's strongest stages. She knew how to glide through a room lit by chandeliers, how to greet investors with the exact measure of warmth, how to make allies feel seen while keeping rivals at arm's length. It was a game she had mastered long ago, a performance of power and poise. But that year, something changed. When Evelyn stepped into the ballroom, she was not alone. At her side was Noah Bennett. Conversations faltered. Glasses paused mid-air. The orchestra played on, but softer now, as though the room itself had drawn breath and held it. For years, Evelyn had commanded attention by her reputation alone. That night, it was her choice of companion that commanded every eye. She felt the weight of the silence, but she did not falter. She greeted people with her usual grace, introduced Noah without hesitation. "This is Noah Bennett," she said simply. Her voice carried no defense, no apology. It was a statement, a declaration. Across the room, Clara Monroe raised her glass in quiet loyalty. Her expression held layers Evelyn recognized: pride, concern, love. Clara did not approve, but she would never abandon her. That was friendship, Evelyn thought. The kind that remained, even when choices couldn't be shared. Harold Whitaker, however, reacted differently. The board's chairman, who had spent years waiting for Evelyn to make a misstep, stood at the far end of the hall. His smile was faint, practiced, unreadable. But Evelyn saw it for what it was: calculation. He had found his opening. The rest of the evening unfolded in formality. Speeches given, hands shaken, glasses raised. But beneath the surface, something had shifted irrevocably. Evelyn knew it when she caught the stares, when she heard the murmurs as people turned away too quickly. The whispers were no longer rumor. They were truth, acknowledged in the silence of that room. By morning, the headlines confirmed what the ballroom had witnessed. Billionaire CEO steps out with young employee. Love across generations, or scandal in the making. Evelyn sat at her breakfast table, the newspaper open, the words sharp against her eyes. She had faced criticism before, had survived worse storms, but this time, it was personal. This time, it was not her leadership or her vision being questioned. It was her heart. And for the first time in many years, Evelyn felt what it was to be vulnerable. If the gala had confirmed the whispers, the wedding ignited the fire. It was a private ceremony, far from the glare of flashing cameras. In a garden Evelyn loved, surrounded by only a small circle of family and friends, she wore a gown of simple ivory. Noah stood at her side, young and confident, his hand steady in hers. Clara Monroe, standing quietly at the edge, watched with love but also with worry etched into her eyes. To those present, it was a tender affair. To the outside world, once news spread, it was nothing short of scandal. Billionaire CEO marries employee half her age. From boardroom to altar, love or reckless gamble. The headlines were merciless. Television hosts debated whether it was love or folly. Investors called with questions, some blunt, others cautious. Employees whispered more openly now. In corridors and meeting rooms, Evelyn heard the shift in tone, saw the pity in their eyes. Respect remained, but it was fragile, cracking beneath the weight of doubt. Harold Whitaker wasted no time. In board meetings, he spoke with careful precision, never naming Evelyn directly, but always circling the issue. "The company must protect its image," he said. "Personal choices must not endanger what we've built." His words were dressed in loyalty, but Evelyn knew they were daggers aimed at her. Noah, on the other hand, seemed to thrive. He smiled for cameras, accepted interviews, carried himself as though he had been born to the spotlight. Where Evelyn sought dignity, he embraced attention. She told herself it was pride, that he simply wanted to support her. Yet a small, uneasy voice inside whispered otherwise. One evening, Evelyn returned to the office late. As she passed near the elevators, she overheard two employees whispering. "She's lost her mind," one said. "This could ruin her." Evelyn froze just out of sight, the words cutting sharper than any headline. At home, she poured herself a glass of wine and sat in the study, staring at the wedding portrait on her desk. She tried to believe that love could silence the doubts, that her choice had been worth the risk. But in the quiet, the truth pressed in. The wedding had not only united her with Noah, it had divided her from her company, her investors, even from parts of herself. Clara's words came back to her. "Love is real, Evelyn, but so are consequences." The wedding was not just a vow, it was a gamble. And deep down, Evelyn knew the stakes were higher than she had ever admitted. Her heart on one side, her empire on the other. For a brief season, Evelyn convinced herself that she had found balance. Work continued, meetings were run with her usual sharp focus, and her marriage seemed steady enough to quiet the doubters. There were evenings of laughter, shared dinners, and the comfort of not being alone. To the outside world, Evelyn Drake was still in control. But deep within, cracks began to show. It was in the small things at first. Noah's phone, always turned face down on the table. His sudden interest in networking events where Evelyn's presence was unnecessary. The way his gaze seemed to linger on opportunity more than on her. Evelyn noticed but pushed it aside. After all, hadn't she spent her life managing storms bigger than this? Still, the cracks spread. Noah began to step forward in ways that unsettled her. He no longer hovered quietly at her side in meetings. Instead, he spoke with growing authority, offering opinions that were bold, sometimes reckless. Evelyn, who had built her empire on patience and precision, found herself uneasy at his hunger for recognition. One evening, she returned home late from negotiations. She found Noah in the study, a glass of scotch in hand, staring into the fire. His words came without preface. "I don't want to be remembered only as your husband. I don't want to live in your shadow." Evelyn's breath caught. She had given him her trust, her world, her name. Yet it was not enough. She reached for words, but none came. For the first time in years, she felt powerless not in business, but in her own marriage. Clara Monroe, always honest, gave the warning Evelyn could not give herself. "He's young," Clara said gently, "and young men often confuse ambition for destiny. Don't let his need to prove himself tear down what you've built." Evelyn nodded but said little. She wanted to believe Clara was wrong. She wanted to believe love was stronger than ambition. But deep down, she knew fault lines, once exposed, rarely close. They spread silently, relentlessly. And when the earth finally shifts, it never asks permission. The first betrayal did not roar like thunder. It slipped in quietly, disguised as something ordinary. One evening, as Evelyn sorted Noah's jacket for the cleaners, she found it, a small folded receipt in the pocket. At first, she smiled faintly, expecting it to be something trivial. But when her eyes scanned the words, her smile faded. A luxury necklace, a gift of rare cost, one she had never received. Her fingers tightened around the paper. She placed it carefully in her desk drawer, as though hiding it could quiet the questions it raised. But the seed had been planted. In the days that followed, whispers reached her ears. Noah had been seen at dinners where he did not belong. Late nights explained away too easily. Laughter shared in corners where it should not have been. Evelyn dismissed them outwardly, but each whisper added weight to the unease already growing inside her. When she asked him directly one night, her voice steady though her heart trembled, his answer came too smoothly. "You're imagining things, Evelyn. You've been under so much pressure. Don't let paranoia ruin us." The words did not soothe her. They deepened the ache. Because they were not words of love, they were words rehearsed to quiet suspicion. Clara noticed Evelyn's weariness. Over coffee, she asked gently, "Do you still trust him?" Evelyn tried to answer, but the truth caught in her throat. For the first time in her life, she doubted her own judgment. The final blow came not from gossip, but from Isabel Hart, Noah's cousin. She came to Evelyn trembling, her voice breaking as she laid down the truth. "He's been meeting with competitors, sharing information he has no right to share. Not everything, but enough." That night, Evelyn confronted Noah with what Isabel had revealed. The fire flickered low, casting shadows on the walls. Evelyn held the papers in her hand, her voice calm but sharp. "Tell me this isn't true." Noah looked at her, his expression unreadable. Then, after a pause that felt like eternity, he said the words that shattered her. "You've always had everything. I needed something for myself." And in that moment, Evelyn Drake understood. The man she had given her heart to had not only betrayed her love, he had turned her trust into currency. The first betrayal had arrived, and nothing in her life would ever be the same again. Betrayal at home rarely stays contained. For Evelyn Drake, the fractures in her marriage seeped into the walls of her company, spreading like cracks in glass. The first ripples were subtle. A journalist called her office with questions that were too pointed, too precise, to be random curiosity. A rival firm made moves at just the right moment, as though tipped off about her company's vulnerabilities. Then, Evelyn began to notice something far more dangerous: the shift in the boardroom. For decades, when Evelyn spoke, people leaned forward. They trusted her instincts, her discipline, her calm in crisis. But now she saw hesitation in their eyes. They still respected her, but the certainty had weakened. Where once there was loyalty, doubt had taken root. Harold Whitaker, her longtime rival and board chairman, wasted no time in seizing the moment. At the quarterly meeting, he leaned back in his chair, voice polished with false concern. "Evelyn, the whispers are growing louder. Investors are nervous. They're questioning whether your personal circumstances are interfering with your professional judgment." The words were delivered like silk, but their meaning was sharp as steel. Around the table, a few heads nodded subtly. Others shifted uncomfortably, unwilling to defend her outright. Evelyn sat tall, her face composed, her voice measured. Drake Enterprises has always stood on results, not rumors. The results remain strong. It was the right answer. But even as she spoke, she felt the tremor underneath. Because she knew the rumors were not without foundation. Outside the boardroom, the storm only grew. Headlines speculated about impropriety. Billionaire CEO distracted by young husband. Leaked documents hint at conflict of interest. Investors called her office relentlessly, some demanding reassurance, others suggesting withdrawal. Evelyn's assistants, once brisk and efficient, now wore exhaustion on their faces. At home, the tension deepened. She confronted Noah in quiet moments. Where had he been on those late nights? Why was his phone always turned face down? His replies came too easily, too smooth. "You don't trust me," he said once, his tone dripping with wounded pride. But Evelyn knew it wasn't trust she lacked. It was truth. Clara Monroe stayed near, urging her to stand tall. "You've weathered storms before," Clara reminded her gently. "This one feels heavier because it's in your heart. But storms always pass, Evelyn. Always." Evelyn nodded, but she knew this storm was unlike any other. Market crashes, hostile takeovers, those could be battled with strategy and discipline. But betrayal was different. It was invisible, corrosive, and deeply personal. Late one night, she stood in her office, staring out over the city's skyline. The lights flickered like fragile stars, a view she had once found steadying. But now, even the city felt distant. She wondered if her empire, built with decades of sweat and sacrifice, could be undone, not by rivals or recessions, but by the man she had chosen to love. The corporate storm had broken, and Evelyn knew the worst was still ahead. The storm outside Evelyn's world was fierce, but the devastation within her heart was far worse. The truth came not as rumor, but as evidence. Isabel Hart, Noah's cousin, arrived at Evelyn's townhouse one evening. Her hands trembled as she placed a folder on the table. Inside were emails, contracts, and records. Proof that Noah had not only spoken with rivals, but had sold them confidential information. "He's been giving them pieces of the company," Isabel whispered, her eyes full of regret. "Not everything, but enough. Enough for them to know where to strike." Evelyn sat motionless, her breath shallow as she stared at the papers. For months she had feared infidelity. She had braced herself for secrets of the heart. But this cut deeper. Noah had not only betrayed her love, he had turned her life's work into a bargaining chip. That night, Evelyn confronted him. The fire burned low in the study, shadows stretching long across the walls. She held the papers in her hand, her voice low and steady. "Is it true?" Noah glanced at the evidence, then at her. His silence lasted long enough to break her hope. Finally he spoke, his words cool, detached. "You've always had everything, Evelyn. I needed something for myself." The sentence shattered her. She had given him her trust, her dignity, her life, and he had reduced it to shadow and resentment. She turned away, unwilling to let him see her tears. The fire crackled between them, its warmth mocking the cold distance now laid bare. Evelyn realized in that moment that the man she had once believed in had never truly stood beside her. He had stood in her shadow, waiting for the chance to step out, even if it meant destroying her. In the days that followed, the world learned the truth. Headlines screamed of betrayal, young husband exposed in corporate leaks, billionaire CEO blindsided. Cameras crowded her gates. Reporters shouted questions she refused to answer. The woman who had been admired for her discipline was now dissected for her heartbreak. Clara stayed close, her quiet presence a lifeline. Julian Cross, one of her young executives, stood by her as others wavered, but none of it could soften the blow. At night, Evelyn sat in her study, staring at the wedding portrait on her desk. The woman in that frame, smiling, radiant, hopeful, felt like a stranger. She was gone, and Evelyn, staring at the broken pieces of her life, understood. The storm had not just reached its peak. It had taken her heart and shattered it beyond repair. The fall did not arrive like thunder. It came in pieces, quiet but relentless, each one cutting away at what Evelyn Drake had spent her life building. 2 weeks after the scandal broke, she walked once more into the boardroom. The same long table, the same polished glass walls. But everything had changed. Where once she commanded the room, now she felt the eyes of doubt pressing down on her. Harold Whitaker sat opposite her, his posture straight, his voice calm but heavy with authority. "For the sake of stability," he said, "we propose appointing me as co-chair until the company has regained investor confidence." The words were dressed in diplomacy, but Evelyn heard the truth beneath them. This was a transfer of power, a coup wrapped in courtesy. She looked around the table at the faces she had known for decades, Some she had mentored, others she had sparred with, all of them bound to her legacy. But their eyes told the story. Pity, discomfort, and worst of all, relief. They wanted this. They wanted her gone. The vote was called. She could have argued. She could have reminded them that without her vision, there would be no Drake Enterprises. But Evelyn knew pleading would not restore broken trust. She would not beg. She lifted her chin, her voice steady. Do what you must. The motion passed. Harold's victory was polite, quiet, devastating. Evelyn still held her title, but not her authority. The empire bore her name, but no longer answered to her. Outside those walls, the damage deepened. Partnerships stalled. Potential deals slipped away. Analysts speculated daily on whether Drake Enterprises would survive. Reporters framed her as a cautionary tale, a woman undone not by markets, but by love. At home, Clara Monroe sat with her often, her presence a balm in the silence. You've carried the weight of the world before, Clara said softly. This time it feels heavier because it was your heart. But Evelyn, you're still here, and that matters. Julian Cross, too, visited with quiet loyalty. They can't erase what you've built, he told her. Drake Enterprises exists because of you. No vote can change that. His faith steadied her, but Evelyn knew the truth. Legacies remain, but power once lost is rarely returned. One evening, she poured herself a glass of wine and sat in her study, staring at the wedding portrait on her desk. She studied the smile on her face, the joy in her eyes, and felt the weight of distance. That woman was gone. In her place sat someone older, wiser, and infinitely more wounded. The fall was not loud. It was not the collapse of a building or the crash of thunder. It was quiet, steady, like sand slipping through her fingers. And Evelyn Drake, once untouchable, sat in silence as the life she had built drifted beyond her grasp. The storm passed, but the silence it left was heavy. Evelyn Drake had lost her place in the company she had built, and her marriage had dissolved into betrayal and shame. The cameras no longer crowded her gate, the headlines no longer screamed her name. But in the quiet, the questions remained. Who was she without her empire, without her title, without the man she had once believed in? For weeks, Evelyn lived in the rhythm of loss. She rose each morning, walked through rooms that felt emptier than before, and sat at her desk surrounded by reminders of all she had built and all she had lost. And yet beneath the ache, something fragile began to stir. Not peace, not yet, but survival. Clara remained her steady anchor, never judging, always present. They shared long evenings over tea or wine, sometimes speaking, sometimes silent. The comfort lay not in answers, but in knowing she was not alone. Julian Cross, too, stayed close. He visited with updates on the company, loyal to her even as the board turned cold. His respect reminded her that she was more than the scandal. She was the foundation of everything Drake Enterprises stood upon. And Noah? He faded quickly. Without Evelyn's name beside his, the world lost interest. The interviews dried up. The photographs stopped. His ambition, once sharpened by her power, dulled in the shadows of obscurity. Evelyn did not follow his decline with bitterness. She simply let him go. Another storm that had run its course. One crisp autumn morning, Evelyn walked alone through a nearby park. The air was cool, the trees painted in shades of gold and amber. She found a bench and sat quietly, watching children play, couples stroll, dogs chase after leaves. Life continued, unbothered by her rise or fall. For the first time in a long while, Evelyn allowed herself to breathe. She thought of the woman she had been in that wedding portrait, smiling, radiant, naive in her hope. That woman was gone. But the woman sitting on the bench now carried something deeper. Scars? Yes. Loss? Certainly. But also resilience. Her empire had been shaken, her heart had been broken, but she was still here. Evelyn Drake realized that her true legacy was not the company that bore her name, nor the wealth she had accumulated. It was the strength to endure, to rise again when the world expected her to fall. That resilience, quiet and unshakable, was hers alone. As the sun broke through the branches overhead, Evelyn closed her eyes and whispered to herself, "I remain." And in that simple truth, she found something no betrayal could ever take away. In the end, Evelyn Drake's story is not just about what was lost, but about what endured. She faced whispers, judgment, betrayal, and the fall of everything she once held secure. Yet through it all, she discovered the truth that outlives scandal. Love may wound us, power may slip away, but dignity and resilience remain. Her journey reminds us that even when the world strips away titles and trust, what defines us is not what we lose, but how we rise from the ruins. Evelyn's strength was not in never falling, but in standing again when the world expected her to stay broken. If this story touched your heart, we'd love to hear from you. Share in the comments. What moment in Evelyn Drake's journey moved you the most? And if you were listening closely, you might notice how often Evelyn Drake's name came up. Drop your answer in the comments. We may feature your name in a shout-out as a thank you for being part of our Fiction Echoes family. If you enjoy meaningful stories like this one, the next chapter is already waiting. Just click the video that's about to appear, and we'll see you there. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and tap the bell so you never miss a moment of what happens next.